All right, I'm back. So let's grow the scope of the conversation now that we've set the tone. I have a little bit of time with you all to do kind of an overview, to touch on some of the major themes that we're going to be exploring in more detail over the next 2 days. So I want to talk with you all while I have some time about technology, about the future, and about the human choices that we will make to shape both as exponential thinkers. Are you ready? Oh, that was that was not encouraging. That was a real question. My friends in the back, are you ready? Okay, good. All right, so let's get into it. Let's start with the future. There are 2 things that I need you to know before we go any further. Thing 1 about the future, and this is the most beautiful thing, is that it is yet to be written. The future is contingent. And I want all of you to be thinking, if you're not already, to be thinking of the future not just as a thing that happens to you, but as a thing that you can meaningfully work to co-create and to shape. That is important. We're going to come back to this. Thing 2 to know about the future is that tomorrow will not be like today. And each successive tomorrow will be more radically different from its respective yesterday than was the tomorrow before that. That's what it means to live in a time of accelerating change. And if we want to better understand how we can design for a tomorrow that we want to inhabit, and if we want to better understand how all of our yesterdays got us to today, I think there are a couple of core principles that will do us very well. The first of these, which is probably the most important thing that I'm going to be able to share with you all today, is the law of accelerating returns that was first articulated by Ray Kurzweil, co-founder of Singularity University and perhaps the world's foremost futurist. So the law of accelerating returns is a law of evolutionary systems. So this is a law as old as life itself. And I want to start with this idea with an evolutionary system that you all know. Thinking of biological evolution, where we know that over billions of years we worked from the origins of life and multicellular organisms slowly all the way up to ourselves, to these magnificent tool-using creatures. Now, in an evolutionary system like this, the selective pressure of evolution itself applies positive feedback at each stage of the process, in that the most promising and most capable methods resulting from one stage of the evolutionary process are used to create the next stage. And as a result, the rate of progress in that evolutionary system increases exponentially over time. So think about just how long it took to get from multicellular organisms to something that resembled an early hominid, and then just how quickly we got from there to here. And consider that as this process accelerates, that ultimately we see biological evolution when it creates the first the first species that can create tools and technologies. Biological evolution has kick-started the process of technological evolution, which is itself an evolutionary system as well. Now, Ray Kurzweil realized that exponential growth is a feature of any evolutionary process, of which technology is a prime example. And so what we have here in technology, just as in biological evolution, is a system where when a new process or development proves adaptive, it is propagated through additional research and development and iteration. And then we see further progress of that strategy, of that tool, of that process over time. And this results in a second level of exponential growth, such that the rate of exponential growth is itself growing exponentially. And that at each new stage of technological development, we are building on the strongest results of the previous stage. This also informs the process that technology forecasters and futurists call combinatorial innovation, where we take the tools that we have today and then we combine them and we use them to build the tools that we will have tomorrow. Now, we can see this in the history of technology. We can see this evolution. If we were to plot, as Ray Kurzweil did, a graph here where on one axis you have population in millions and on the other you have time, and then we have a scatter plot with technological milestones, we can see a few things. One, it takes a really long time to get from the earliest technological milestones in this admittedly reductive chart, to get from there to mathematics, and to think about where physics would be. But once we get over here and we start working towards the extreme right side of the graph, the pace of innovation itself appears to accelerate radically, such that almost everything seems to be happening at once. And indeed, almost everything that you probably consider to be technology when you think of it has happened within the last 150 years. And so what we can see here, if we read a little bit further, two additional things. One, that as we're growing the human population, sustaining those increasingly complex and sophisticated systems has required more innovation. But we can also see that as we are getting more tools and technologies into the hands of more innovators, as we're growing the community of solvers, we're able to increase the pace of innovation. We are able to accelerate that process at which we find solutions. And indeed, this is accelerating exponentially. And so now let's go from where this puts us into our future, where we know that we are living in we're living in a period of accelerating change. We're living in an exponential time. We're living in a world that is digital, that is networked at the global level, where any innovation, any technology that is birthed in this global ecosystem will scale with a rapidity that would have been impossible in previous eras. And so what we're looking at is a time where not only the rate of innovation, but also the rate at which new challenges emerge and new solutions can be created, that is accelerating as well. And knowing all of this, we should realize that today's crazy pace of change is likely to be the slowest that we will ever experience. And that makes it more important than ever to take the long view. But taking the long view is hard. This is something that we're not particularly good at as a species. We evolved in a world that was local and linear. The last time we upgraded the wetware, the last time we upgraded not the tools but the tool user, that was about 70,000 years ago, where we could do a very good job of adapting by predicting future performance based on past experience. We could expect that tomorrow the sun would come up and it would shine down on a world that looked more or less like today, or yesterday, or our parents' yesterday. But with that world gone, as we're moving into a world where we don't have past experience to draw upon, we have to adopt a new mindset. We have to adopt a new way of thinking. But it's going to be hard to make a break with linear thinking and to become exponential thinkers. In fact, here's another law. This is called Amara's law, from Roy Amara, who was the president of the Institute of the Future. And this isn't really a law in the same way that Kurzweil's law of accelerating returns is. This is just a really keen observation of human behavior. And Amara wrote that we tend to overestimate the effect of a technology in the short run and underestimate the effect in the long run. And my colleague Michelle Zappa with SingularityU Portugal pointed out to me recently that one of the funny things about this is it's true even when we know it's true, which makes it uniquely difficult to get around. But let's consider an example, one that's familiar to all of us. The smartphone, the all-important point of convergence for any number of exponential technologies. You probably remember when you first got one of these, yes? And if you're like me, you probably remember when you got it, you thought it was going to change everything. Not least of all for you, that you were going to become infinitely more productive. Maybe. Maybe that didn't happen. I don't know, that didn't happen for me. The world did not immediately change the way that I thought it might. And yet, I severely underestimated the longer-term consequences, the ways in which this device would remake our world and would bend the course of global culture and politics. That's something most of us didn't even dimly realize, but maybe we should have, because some of the indicators have been there for a long time. This is actually the exponential that most of us would be the most likely to be familiar with. Advances in computation, Moore's law. Consider this. On the right-hand side, you have the Cray-1 supercomputer. Circa 1976, this was the fastest computer in the world. It cost about $33 million US at the time. And it held that title of fastest supercomputer for about 5 years. On the left-hand side, you have the humble iPhone 5S, now several generations back. Most of you probably aren't even carrying one of these anymore. I could get one today on eBay for probably about $120 US. Now, you probably have a sense of which of these is the more powerful computing device, right? Because you're here, and we're talking about exponential technologies, and yet you probably don't properly appreciate by just how much. What this means is that for some years, each of us has been walking around with 1,000 supercomputers in our pocket for just a fraction of the price. And this also means that all of you have, some of you are playing with right now, more collective computing power than NASA had when they put 2 men on the moon in the 1960s. This also means that you probably know someone, maybe you even are that person, who's dropped the collective computing power of NASA in the toilet at a nightclub on a Friday night. Yeah, it's funny, but we should also think about what does it mean to have all of this power? And what does it mean to know that this is something that has been going on for a long time and will continue? Most of you are probably familiar with Moore's law. Would any of you feel comfortable articulating Moore's law in front of 700 people? No volunteers. All right, so I'll have to do it. So for about the last 50 or so years, we have seen the price performance of computing roughly double every year and a half. And Gordon Moore of Intel was the first to recognize this trend. But Ray Kurzweil realized that Moore's law was only the 5th paradigm in a process that's been going on for far longer. And this graph looks like a pretty smooth, linear increase in the price performance of computation, but that's because it's on a log scale. If I did this on a linear scale, I would have to have a screen that went much, much higher, right? And note that this goes back 110 years, and at this smooth progression goes through times of tremendous global upheaval. War didn't make a difference, right? We've been on this path for a long time as we've had this series of S-curves where each computational paradigm, just as it starts to peter out in its potential, has allowed us to create the next. So what will come after Moore's law? Well, we can already see the beginnings of 6th paradigm in nanotech and in quantum computing. So we know that in this future, we are likely to see a continued abundance of computational power. And that doesn't just mean that we're gaining in computational price performance. It means that every technology that is able to ride this wave of abundant computation is itself an exponential technology and is itself at least doubling in its price performance every year and a half. And in some cases, it's doing much more than that. All of these are exponential technologies. Some of them we're going to be focusing on in the next 2 days. Bottom line, we're daily expanding the scope of the possible. We're daily expanding the ways in which we can understand our world, ourselves, our interactions, and our future. And we're moving into a world now where we can leverage intelligence and even creativity beyond the human to design that future. We're seeing, in addition to Moore's law, where we've seen the price performance of computation increased 10,000-fold since the year 2000, we've also seen the cost of data storage go down by a factor of 3,000 over the same period. And we've seen an exponential explosion in data that we have captured and created itself, right? And we're at a point now where we're entering in a world where we need to be thinking very carefully about what it means to be good trainers and even good role models for our artificially intelligent and robotic children. And we're getting to that world much more quickly than most of us realize. I mean, remember, it wasn't that long ago, it was only 30 years ago that we were here. This was the 1980s. And now we're all sitting on something greater than the collective computing power needed to coordinate a moon landing. So what happened? How did we get here? Have a look. This is a video created by the Harvard Innovation Lab, and you just got to watch the desktop and the office that many of us knew and at one point either loved or loathed. We just watched that thing transform over time. We watched a lot of it disappear, right? As all those material artifacts of that traditional desktop and office environment, all of those things digitized and dematerialized. And through a process of convergence, they all came on to this thing that had been a phone that eventually became something entirely other than a phone, something far beyond that. And that gets us pretty close to today, right? This process of digitization, dematerialization, and convergence. But the question is, if that video ends with a laptop and a smartphone, which is what many of us spend our days with, where do we go from there? I don't know about you all, but I already have a weird relationship with those devices. I don't do a lot of calls on this thing, but I do a lot of computing. And weirdly, I do a lot of business calls on video on my laptop. But what happens next? Exponential thinkers, where do we go from there? I'm serious. Are you going to spend the rest of your days with a laptop and a smartphone? What's going to happen? I see some of you looking at your watches. I hope that doesn't mean you're checking the time. I hope you're thinking, oh, well, maybe it'll be my Apple Watch. Maybe this is all going to go onto my watch. You might be right, but I would argue that you're not thinking far enough ahead. You're not thinking exponentially if you're looking at your wrist right now. Where else might we go? What are we going to do with this clunky interface? I heard the word brain up front. Thank you. Yeah, there's a whole gang of people in Silicon Valley and in other innovation ecosystems around the world who are trying to get rid of this screen interface. They're imagining something else entirely. They're imagining a world that is connected not in the way that right now you might have a smart thermostat or a refrigerator that can place a grocery order for you. No, they're imagining a world that you can interact with in real time, seamlessly and effortlessly, and without even a perceptible interface. Elon Musk thinks he knows where we're headed. You've probably heard about his Neuralink initiative. And Elon is not alone in trying to imagine this brain-computer interface, right? DARPA, the good people who brought you the internet, among other amazing technological innovations, DARPA put about $65 million worth of funding into related research projects like this last year. So this world may be closer than you realize. And we could probably spend the rest of our time together debating whether this is a future that you want. But I would also argue we may be much closer to a future in which augmenting human sense-making capability will be necessary than you realize. This is a video of something from the Graphics and Imaging Lab at the University of Washington, where they created a deep learning neural network trained on videos of Barack Obama speaking, and they could make new video to match any audio of the president's voice. Have a look.
To help families refinance their homes, to invest in things like high-tech manufacturing, clean energy, and the infrastructure that creates good new jobs. Not to mention the job training that helps folks earn new skills to fill those jobs. The results are clear.
Are the results clear? You all tell me. Which one of these is the original video footage of Barack Obama? What do you think? I see a gesture to the bottom left. I see you're shaking your head. You disagree, sir. No. I could let you argue with your neighbors for a little while, or I could just tell you all of your answers are probably wrong. All of these videos are fake, in the sense that all of these videos were generated by an artificial intelligence system. Now, they started with real audio, but we're at the point there's a company called Lyrebird that can create the audio as well. Now, the first time I saw this, in the summer of 2017, I thought, wow, I kind of missed this guy. This is cool. Now I can see 4 of him. The second thing I thought was, well, it's only a matter of time before this stuff gets out into the world. So I'll start telling attendees at Singularity conferences that one day we're going to be living in a world where we will no longer be able to tell with video what is real and what's not. That we might be entering into a world where we'll be facing a genuine epistemological crisis, where we won't be able to agree on what is real or what is true. I thought that might take a while. It turned out to only take a couple of months for similar technologies and tools to this one to get out onto the internet. We're living in that world now. And if you look at this and you think, holy wow, we are screwed. That's not an inappropriate response. But yet, remember that law of accelerating returns. We're always building new tools. And in fact, a German researcher named Andreas Rüssler in Munich last spring had built another deep learning neural network trained on fake video that was better at spotting fake videos than any human. So maybe we could continue to engineer our way out of problems that we engineered our way into. I don't know about you all, but that's not a future I'm excited about. Instead, I would propose that what we need is to get better at anticipating these futures, get better at seeing the unintended consequences, and own up to the fact that these systems that we're creating, these are non-neutral feedback systems. We need to be thinking more deeply and more rigorously about the design choices we have in building the future. We need to embrace the responsibility of designing the tools that will design us. One of my heroes, Donna Haraway, who is an academic at UC Santa Cruz in the United States and a philosopher and anthropologist of technology, wrote that technology is not neutral, that we're inside of what we make and it's inside of us. We're living in a world of connections, and it matters which ones get made and unmade. And I would argue that we're at a point where we can really take this knowledge and we can build on it, or we can continue to shy away from that responsibility, in which case we're abdicating our role in co-creating the future and making design choices in a world where we know that the consequences of those choices will scale exponentially, either for the better or the worse. And so perhaps now we're at a point where we can look back on the technological artifacts of our recent past and better understand what they mean for our future. That we can understand what some of these things will become because we've seen enough now to know. Peter Diamandis, the other co-founder of Singularity University, suggested this framework, which he called the 6 Ds for exponential technology and disruption. As you can see from this infographic, all of this starts with digitization. Once a thing becomes digitized, we can manipulate it. We can do new things with it. We can copy, paste. We can share at zero marginal cost and reproduce. We can also hack the thing. And these are the familiar examples, the things that you already know about: audio, image, video, text, maybe DNA. But think about the other things that we're learning to digitize, like trust relationships. You've probably heard a lot recently about blockchains. That's what they're trying to figure out with that kind of technology, right? And we know that once something has been digitized and that technology becomes information-enabled, it's now riding at least the curve of Moore's law. And we might be watching it move from that earliest proof of concept, where there's a long, deceptive, disappointing phase, where this thing just doesn't look like it's ever going to be market viable, or it won't scale. We can't see how we could build a new business on it. And that could go on for a good long time before we reach a critical point where we can introduce a real market substitute, a real alternative that's viable. And then very quickly, that thing becomes disruptive because it's not just an alternative, it's vastly preferable and different, so much so that it renders the previous things in the market obsolete, right? That's disruption. And we know what disruption looks like. We know that disruption looks like dematerialization, where the old artifacts go away. The old things that were involved in producing that good or service are no longer necessary. We see demonetization, something that was enormously expensive to either possess or to do. The means of production were available to very few, to governments and to the largest corporations. Now those things are more widely available. And we've cut out the established middlemen. Business models that were long relevant are no longer so. And then we see democratization, where we're getting these tools into more hands. And that can be frightening. It can also be deeply empowering. As I said, this is our opportunity to grow the community of solvers, to have more people who are closer to the problems that need to be solved, empowered with the tools that they need to solve those problems. That's a future I'm excited about. Now let's take a look at what this might look like out in our world. Consider the example of genome sequencing. How many of you have had your genome sequenced? Anybody? I see a few brave souls in the back. Me too. I would love to get you all together again in 3 years and ask that question and see how many more hands are up. And then maybe again in 10 years. And anyone who's not raising their hand will probably be wrong. And they may just not know it's already happened. Why? Well, because the first time we did this, it cost almost $3 billion. And it took 10 years plus. It was a sort of endeavor that required the resources of a nation state. Just about 9 years later, we've lopped off a bunch of those zeros, right? And to get from 3 billion to 350,000, if we had been doing a linear increase in price performance, let's say we imagined, once we have that proof of concept, we know that we can sequence a genome, and we said, we're going to make this $25 million cheaper every year, it would have taken more than a century to get to that $350,000 mark. But this is not something that is showing a linear increase in improvement. It is exponential. And from 2006, we only have to go 8 years to get down to the $1,000 genome. This was the point where people could really start to see building businesses on the backs of this technology, reimagining healthcare and drug discovery, personalized medicine. In 2017, Illumina Systems, just up the street from Singularity University, where I work, started shipping the machines that they said would be able to produce the $100 genome, and that they could do it 3 times faster, and the machine would cost less than $1 million. But where do we go from here? Does it stop at 100? What does a world of abundant genetic information and sequencing look like? Well, we know some of these things. We can already see the technology is getting out of the lab. This is the handheld, real-time DNA RNA sequencing device from Oxford Nanopore Technologies. It's called the MinION. Right? This is getting out of the lab and into the world. It no longer requires the machine that it used to. We also know that that cost curve is continuing to decline, that we are approaching zero marginal cost. And in fact, just 2 weeks ago, George Church's Nebula Genomics made this announcement. You had 2 choices here. You could get your DNA sequenced for $100, that's the $100 genome, and you could start seeing through the website that they had set up, the service and the platform that they had built, you could start seeing the companies that might be interested in using some of your data, and your medical data, your genomic data would be stored on a blockchain so that you could actually have security and privacy and also ultimately get paid for who would access that data. Or you could go the free route, and you could start by getting matched with research institutions based on your medical history that might be interested in your sequencing, and that would earn you points, effectively. And eventually, you have the points to get your genome sequenced for free, right? With the idea that you are going to be trading some of that information for the free sequencing. So we are at the moment in history where this genetic information is going to become abundant, where sequencing is going to become widely available. And we're going to have a lot of interesting choices at that point that we will need to make about the kind of world we want to live in, about what we're going to do with our health data. How do we want to operationalize it? How do we want to share it? And what will be done with it? And there are a lot of companies that are moving into the fields that are opening up as we are creating this abundance of genetic information and as we are increasing our understanding of the building blocks of life itself. One I think is particularly fascinating. You're going to hear about a bunch of these from Raymond McCauley tonight and from Mark Post and David Hunt tomorrow. So I'm not going to go into much detail, but one I think is particularly fascinating, a company called Modern Meadow. Modern Meadow is creating a technology to be able to produce biofabricated leather. Effectively, synthetic leather that looks, feels, and behaves just like real leather, but no animal, no livestock is involved. Instead, what they're doing is they're hacking yeast fermentation, right? So that they're creating a microfactory, effectively, that is going to produce this animal product. You have animal product without the animal. You're decoupling animal product from environment. And if you can produce leather, you can produce a whole lot of other things. And you can reimagine the environmental impact that our traditional means of production based on ranching at the industrial level and also based on agriculture, we can reimagine the impact that that will have on our planet, right? Because this isn't just about leather, it's about producing all sorts of other things in a sustainable fashion as we're able to engage in what's called cellular agriculture and to leverage these microfactories. And you're probably already thinking, well, if we can hack yeast and if we can manipulate these building blocks of life, there are probably other things we can start to do, right? And there are. These are some of the first human heart cells that were produced synthetically, right? These were 3D bioprinted, but they could match the genetic information of any human, right? So we are at the point now where we can create representative tissue from any one of us. These could match my heart perfectly. We could have something that matched my pancreas. I'm a diabetic. I'm already kept alive by a machine, but maybe we can get me something better than that down the line, right? This sort of technology, we can see these, they twitch periodically because they're responding to their environment just as heart cells should. What we can see here is the beginnings of radically new approaches to drug development via organ-on-a-chip technologies. We can see the beginnings of engineering or re-engineering humans and changing the course of evolution, which means changing what it means to be human. So we have some very, very big choices that we need to be wrestling with. We're going to talk more about this later. But what I want you to realize now is that for a lot of these technologies, and many of the ones that you're going to hear about today and tomorrow, we have long been in this deceptive growth phase where we've been disappointed with we haven't seen what we expected yet. But we're moving from the point where we are now, right, where we're crossing that good enough line, where these things are starting to become widely available. They're demonetizing and democratizing, and we're moving into an era of amazement and chaos. We've imagined a little bit of what the chaos might look like already. I want to focus on the amazement now. Because if we have this ever-expanding tool set, and we can realize any future that we can imagine, what we need to focus on is imagining the future that we want to create and deciding which problems do we really want to solve. Because while we live in a world of immense beauty, it has no shortage of problems. Right? So I want to talk briefly about bugs in this system that we live in and that we've created. Right? We know, as I said, that despite this world full of inspiration and beauty, there's no shortage of challenges to be met. And now we have the tools to meet those challenges, and we've been growing the community of solvers so that we can do so more effectively. This is Linus Torvald, the founder of Linux, who had a famous quote about open source software that's become known as Torvald's Law, where he said, "Given enough eyeballs, all bugs are shallow." I think this applies to things far beyond software. I think in our world today, if you have enough people empowered with the tools to solve the problems they want to solve, we're more likely to reach the right solutions, the ones that will scale. An interesting example, you're going to hear tomorrow from my colleague Ramez Nam about exponential energy, and he'll touch a little bit on solar, I'm sure, which you all are already working on quite a bit in Colombia. I want to make the point here that this is a technology that has been around for a long time. We've been able to produce electricity from the sun for a long time, but the cost of this technology is continuing to decrease such that we're at the point now of both price and performance where we're approaching a world of zero marginal cost for producing clean energy. And in 2017, we reached a point where we could produce solar cells thinner than a human hair that could sit on a soap bubble without breaking it. So we can put solar anywhere. What does that mean? What does it mean to live in a world where these technologies are abundant? What can we do with them? Well, this is a team of global entrepreneurs from an organization called Magic Water that spent some time with the Singularity University Global Solutions Program and Startup Program in summer of 2017. And they wanted to leverage family-scale solar and hydrophilic materials to capture water from the air, such that if you have air and sunlight, you can have clean, safe drinking water to address worsening drought conditions. Particularly, they were focused on rolling out a prototype in Kenya. And in summer of 2017, in Mountain View, on a day with about 58% humidity, they hacked together this proof of concept prototype, which doesn't look like much, and were able to produce 10 liters of water from the air that day using solar technology. And their goal is to be able to produce clean water at less than 1 cent per liter with bundled finance in a system that will work off-grid. And they're using technology here. They're using the available tools and a growing tool set to render something that has long been scarce, clean water, abundant. This is transformative. And this is the work of impact-focused entrepreneurs who understand the problem and are empowered with the tools. And this is increasingly important to creating the future that we want. Because we only have one of these. Right? We have one of these, and we know that it has a lot of issues. We know that we have 17 sustainable development goals, and we know that there is a market argument for addressing these, that we might be able to, in addressing the sustainable development goals, we might be able to create 380 million jobs and $12 trillion. This is a huge market opportunity, but we have to see it at that every threat, every challenge is an opportunity to be realized, is a chance to do and to be better. Such that when we see something like this, that there are 1 billion in our world unhoused, that we see that opportunity. We have the chance to prove the tool user worthy of the tool set. And when we see 1 billion unhoused, we might see a solution like this one. There are 2 companies who created a partnership, a construction tech company called Icon and a housing nonprofit called New Story, that last spring, in March of 2018, in my hometown, Austin, Texas, they 3D printed a home in under 24 hours for less than $10,000. And they have plans to produce equivalent houses for under $4,000 in developing countries. And they already have pilots planned in Mexico, El Salvador, and Bolivia to partner with local communities and to use local crews and local materials. This is transformative technology. This is a solution that can be scaled, that is exponential. But this requires a change in the way that we see our world. It requires a change in mindset. And I want to close with a note on mindset and becoming. Some of you are probably familiar with Carol Dweck, a pioneering cognitive and learning psychologist at Stanford University. A little over a decade ago, she wrote a book called Mindset, and she laid out a theory of mindset, differentiating between what she called the fixed mindset that was characterized by the idea that intelligence and ability are innate, that we are who and what we are, versus what she called the growth mindset, characterized by the idea and the belief that ability and intelligence are developed and that we can become who we want to be. And Dr. Dweck focused initially on children and looking at learning and looking at mastering new tasks and problem solving. And she found that the growth mindset was very significantly correlated with successful outcomes. That the children who believed that they could rise to the occasion, believed that they could acquire and develop this new skill, were much more likely to be able to do so. And indeed, as she expanded the study to look at outcomes over life and to look at adults and to look at what we consider to be successful and happy people, she found that those who exhibited the growth mindset fared much better overall. Now, what does this mean for us? Well, as Dr. Dweck wrote, the fixed mindset does not allow people the luxury of becoming because they already have to be. They are who and what they're going to be, and that's it. And when we are living in an exponential world of accelerating change, we're living in a world that is perpetually becoming something new. And if that world is becoming something new always, then we need to also become something new as well. We have to become exponential thinkers and problem solvers and empowered agents of change, working to build the network that our world needs. We have the opportunity to become something new. But to do that requires us to let go of the old. It requires us perhaps to do what the futurist Christian Cruz calls killing the official future. That we have to let go of an idea of what the future was going to be like and what our role was going to be within it. Because too often the official future that an organization has, that it's always planning and designing and strategizing against, or that the individual has for what their world will be like and how they plan to meet it, too often that thing is not responsive to an evolving context. So we have to take that official future down off the shelf. Even if we don't kill that official future, we at least have to interrogate it and update it. And we have to push ourselves in the time we have together over these next 2 days to kill that official future and to embrace the possible future. To think of all the things that might be. And then to work from that to the things that should be. Right? To go from all that we might do to what we should do. And then from there to the thing that we will do. To the future that we will create together. So, with that, I want to welcome you all to the possible futures, to lift a glass with this robotic arm, to celebrate our time together. I'm very much looking forward to it. It's been a pleasure to start things off with you, and I would now like to cede the stage to one of my favorite people in the Singularity universe, our next speaker, who is our managing director of international summits at Singularity University. And she has worked with summit partners like Claudia here. She's worked with summit partners around the world to bring these kinds of programs, these educational and transformational experiences to more than 40,000 people, helping them change the way that they think about the future and about their role in creating it. And she's had a very interesting path to get here. It has been, if you will, non-linear. And she brings that perspective to the themes of learning to see, to do, and to be different. So now I will ask you all to please give a very warm welcome to the stage to my dear friend, Badana Kasala.